Then Esther told Hethach to go back and relay this message to Mordecai. All the king's officials and even the people in the provinces know that anyone who appears before the king in his inner court without being invited is doomed to die unless the king holds out his gold scepter. And the king has not called for me to come to him for 30 days. So Hethach gave Esther's message to Mordecai, and Mordecai sent this reply to Esther. Don't think for a moment that because you're in the palace you will escape when all other Jews are killed. If you keep quiet at a time like this, deliverance and relief for the Jews will arise from some other place. But you and your relatives will die. Who knows if perhaps you were made queen for just such a time as this. Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai. Go and gather together all, shout all, the Jews of Susa, and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. My maids and I will do the same. And then, though it is against the law, I will go in to see the king. And if I must die, I must die. So Mordecai went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him to do. Everybody shout amen. Amen. Please be seated. God, pour your spirit on broken flesh, work a miracle, and bring a transformative word. In Jesus' name, amen. Please shout this subject, I commit. Shout it. Come on, a little louder. I commit. Shout it. Very good. That is what my prayer is, and at the end of this message, that is what I hope you will do. That is what these young people who just finished being baptized, that's what they did. They committed their next level of commitment with Jesus Christ. Some of you recall a few weeks ago, first of all, I want to just acknowledge and give God thanks and praise for Pastor Dan Monroe, who just last weekend brought just such a sweet and simple and powerful, loving word of the gospel of Jesus Christ to us all. Can we just celebrate this thought? That was a few weeks ago, I was in Boston and went back to preach the ordination of a young lady who accepted a call under my ministry when I was there, and had a couple of other opportunities as well. Now, it happened to be the same weekend. Those of you who've been watching the news, you know that Boston was and continues to undergo the worst snowstorm season, literally, in the history of Boston. As God would have it, he would coordinate my trip back to Boston right in the middle of the worst snowstorm season in the history of Boston. I preached 3 services and got back to Boston, and I was living 40 miles north of Boston with a dear friend of mine, Dr. Wesley Roberts. That's where my computer and my clothes were. I arrived about 5:30, and around by that time, when I got back to Boston to get my car, the temperature dropped to about 16 degrees. Then, it was 16 degrees, but it was about 7 degrees wind chill factor, which meant it felt like 7 degrees. It was cold. So I got in the car. I'm going to try to get up 40 miles, get out of the city of Boston. But then the heart of the blizzard hit. And I literally couldn't get out of the city. So I had to rent a hotel room and just stay there. I was stuck in Boston for that night next morning. So I pulled out my computer and pulled up the message because Pastor Tilden preached that weekend. Preached about how to get unstuck, interestingly enough. And he was talking about how to press in on prayer and look for an encounter with God. And I just felt the Lord kind of ministering to me and just kind of making it clear in my heart that part of why I was in Boston in the midst of the worst snowstorm in its history was because he wanted me to have a little private prayer retreat. And so the next morning, my plane was canceled. My flight was canceled. And so I called Rhonda and discussed this with Rhonda. She said she had a confirmation in her own spirit that was, in fact, what God wanted me to stay there and engage in prayer. And so she said, where's your computer and clothes? I said, well, it's just 40 miles north of here in Dr. Roberts' house. She said, yeah, that's it right there. She said, it would take an act of God to separate you from your computer and from work. So I stayed. I buckled in and actually I could have left the next day, but I stayed 2 days. Buckled into my room, didn't really exit much, and just didn't let people know I was there, and just spent 2 days in prayer, seeking God. And in fact, it was then that God just really began to trouble my heart and make some things clear for me. You know, we've been wrestling here with how finding a building because, you know, God keeps sending more and more people here. And I keep hearing just some fascinating stories. Here's a story that I heard, for example, to show you what God is doing here remarkably. One of the ladies who is part of our hospitality team was in the store purchasing a lot of bananas and things because what we serve for hospitality. So she had a cart full of bananas. This happened just a few weeks ago. And I'm told that a lady came up to her and asked, "What are you doing with all those bananas?" And so our member and partner here said, I'm hospitality at MBCC. And she said, "Well, what is that?" She said, "This is a church." She said, "Where is it?" She told her where it is. And the next weekend, the lady showed up. And she's been coming every week ever since. Come on, let's celebrate. That's the good news. That's what God is doing in this place. So I know that God doesn't have a real problem finding us a building because a few weeks, and I was thinking about this in my prayer, just a few weeks ago, we found a perfect office space for us, 4,000 square feet, and just to demonstrate that it was God, right? He furnished the office space completely. Cubicles, desks, chairs, trash can, printers, file cabinets, all the way down to the paper clips. Everything color coordinated with the office and completely donated. We celebrate that. So God was just kind of saying, "Look, I can move when I get ready to move." So this notion of not moving with a building, and I know that He wants us to keep reaching more and more people with His love and His grace, and calling us to stretch out a real step of faith to do Easter at the Flint Performing Arts Center. And then 3 weeks after that, we're going out to make a difference at these two schools, really to show the love of Jesus Christ. And so He's calling us to stretch and stretch. So what's going on? And the real answer came, I want you, not just me, but MBCC, to press in, seek His face, to spend some time in prayer as a congregation. So I came back and we pushed back. My series will start next week, it's supposed to start this week, so that I could actually just say to you that God is calling, I believe, the entire congregation for the next 40 days, starting tomorrow, Monday, going to Friday after Easter, Friday before Easter, which we call Good Friday. That's 40 days. My family and I are going to go to Easter. But to spend that time in prayer and fasting, we call it consecration, seeking God's face for an encounter with God. All of us. Now, if you don't do it, don't worry. I'm not going to say that you're a horrible person or anything like that. Well, no, I'm not. But I think you're going to miss out. Now, that brings us to this text. This text, the Lord led me to this text, and as I would have never thought about teaching from Esther around fasting, but it led me to this text. There are a couple of things that jumped right out at me as I think about Esther that I want to just share with you that anchors me here. The first thing that jumps out at me is the messiness of this text. Everybody say messy. Now, I encourage you to read it. It's 10 chapters. I encourage you to read it when you go home. Doesn't take a long time for you to read it. But this is messy. This is messy. Let me give you a quick story. Here's a quick story. Xerxes, who is the king of the empire, Persian Medes Empire, and the Jewish people are there by way of exile. And he throws a big party for 6 months celebrating his power. For another week, he throws another party celebrating the folk in the capital city. And then he calls the queen, his wife, Vestas, to come out because she's known for her beauty. And so he's calling her to come out so he can just kind of display her for her beauty. He wanted everybody to know. He's just kind of like, look at my wife. She's fine, right? So Vestas says, no. This is pretty shocking at this point in history to find it in the biblical context. Vestas says, no. I'm more than flesh. I'm more than a pretty face. I'm not going to let you do that to me. And so throws everybody into a crisis. He basically disposes her, just fires her, gets rid of her, throws a beauty contest across the kingdom. A young girl named Esther, her parents had died. Her cousin adopted her. His name is Mordecai and became a stepfather. instructed her, don't let nobody know that you're a Jew, but enter the beauty contest. And this is where it gets really messy, right? So this king, Xerxes, he's got 2 harems full of women. And so he's trying to get all the prettiest women that he can find. They could join up with a harem, and then, he's sleeping with them, night after night to try to figure out which one he's going to actually have for a queen. Now, I know there's some guys in here, you will never say this, but I know this is on your mind. Wow, I was born in the wrong time. My gosh. I know this is a fact. This is a fact. I know what you're thinking. All right, somebody say messy. Come on. All right, so Mordecai puts his stepdaughter forward, and she goes through that process. She's immediately rises in the ring, sleeps with him. He falls in love. She becomes queen. Mordecai becomes a part of the palace team, the officers. And then Haman, the prime minister, passes by, and Mordecai refuses to bow, and Haman is upset and finds out that Mordecai's a Jew, and so he says, I'm not just going to take out Mordecai, I'm going to kill all the Jews. How dare him not bow before me? And he sets a plan in motion that a year later he's going to kill all the Jews, and Mordecai gets word to Esther, and Mordecai essentially says to Esther, listen, I need you to go and plead before the king, plead for mercy for your people. Here's what's going to happen. And then Esther said, well, I can't do that because he hasn't called on me for 30 days, and it's against the law for me to show up in the inner court unless he requests. If I do, he'll probably kill me. And Mordecai said, well, listen, check it out. Don't just think that because you're in the palace that when all the other Jews are killed, you're going to be spared. No, you're going to be killed too. It's about your self-interest. Go. Who knows, he says. Perhaps you were made queen for such a time as this. So she ultimately makes a decision, and she says, okay, go get everybody together, and Susan's all the Jews, fast for me for 3 days, don't eat, don't drink, and on the 3rd day, even though it's against the law, I'm going to go in and see him, and if I must die, I must die. And you talk about commitment. And so this is a pretty messy text. Even Mordecai is not squeaky clean. I mean, who would send his stepdaughter to sleep with somebody to see whether or not she becomes first lady of a country? That's kind of messy. All right? It's all messy. But why I like it is because the text demonstrates that God is always at work even in our messiness. And that God can take poor choices and poor decisions in the midst of our messiness. And if you just allow God to be God, in due season, he can work it all towards the good. Now, that should be some good news for some of y'all, because if you look at your life, it's messy. But God hasn't abandoned you in your messiness. Come on, celebrate that. That's good news. Second thing I like about this book, Esther, is it's one of 2 books that's named for a woman. The other one is Ruth. And it reminds us that if you put Deborah alongside of Esther and the judges, and if you run forward in the New Testament and put Mary, probably Mary Magdalene, the first to share the good news that Jesus was raised from the dead, the gospel, if you will, and put those women aside, the women who were in the upper room and the Holy Spirit fell on them, and men and women both prophesied for the Lord. It reminds us, and I want our young girls to hear this, those in high school and middle schools, and our women to hear this who've had a pretty tough time, because check this out about Esther. Now look, her parents died, she's adopted, she's messed over by folks. She ended up having to sleep with somebody in order to get to where she is. She's got all this woundedness in her life, and at the end of the day, God is still able to use her to save a people and change the course of a nation. So I want the women in this church to hear, particularly young women and others, to hear that here we believe that God calls women to partner with men to be a part of his kingdom work to change the world. Celebrate it. That's why you see women all across the church in every aspect, teaching and part of the advisory board and everything. We think that God calls us to partner together. The third thing that is fascinating for me about this is the relatability. Everybody say relatability. All right, here's where it connects. Esther is the only book in the Bible where the name God is never mentioned. You'll never see God written in Esther. You'll never see the Lord or anything like that. It's completely missing. It's the only book in the Bible where you don't see, besides fasting, which is an expression of prayer, you don't see the word prayer at all. You don't see worship at all. You don't see repentance at all. None of that. Now, the scholars suggest that part of what might be going on is that it's the way that the author is trying to communicate that the Jews who will remain in the Persian Empire at that time, I'm going to talk about timing in just a minute, they weren't on fire believers. They were nominal. They were marginal, if you will. They were culturally religious, but not much more. Now, I like that because God used these marginal believers to change history. So why do you bring that out? Because here, right here, a lot of folk here are on fire for the Lord. You're doing devotions every day. You're worshiping not just on Sunday, but in your own private time. You're witnessing at your job. You're talking about your faith. You're praying and you're growing, and you're moving to the next level. But there are a lot of us here, because that's the uniqueness of this church, because God, the way God is working this church. There are a lot of folk who've showed up here. This is the best of your spiritual experience. You're not talking about God. God is not on your lips beyond a Sunday morning experience. You're not praying on a regular basis. You're not reading the Bible unless you're here and we're getting ready to stand and so forth and so on. And you kind of feel like the young man who was working with me earlier this morning. He said when I made this point that the folk in the book of Esther, they weren't spiritual giants. And he said to me, wow, that was helpful to me. He said, because whenever I come here, I feel like I'm surrounded by spiritual giants. And I just want to kind of just kind of disappear. And I said, oh my goodness. I said, first of all, don't believe your eyes. Right. And secondly, every major so-called giant in the Bible started off pretty much marginal with clay feet. For example, Moses is 80 years old. We're not even sure that he believes in God by the time God finds him out there in the desert at 80 years old and shows up in this unexplainable event called the burning bush. And yet God got his attention, and when God got his attention, turned his life right side up and used him to reshape history. So the good news today, my dear friends and brothers and sisters, is that for those of you who are on fire for the Lord, hallelujah, let's go to the next level. But for the rest of you who said, I'm just kind of showing up and I'm not really sure where I'm in my faith, and this fasting thing, I'm not sure, I don't know, is that for me? Esther teaches us that if you're in the building today, come on now, if there's just a little curiosity to figure out what's going on, God uses folk like you. So stretch out and fast a little bit. Well, that's the call. God is calling us, wherever we are in our faith journey, trust him and fast. I think that's a word from God directly. Trust him and do this 40-day season of consecration. Secondly, what moved the folk to prayer? What moved them? Two things. One, timing. Everybody shout timing. A lot of scholars believe that Esther actually belongs in the book of Ezra. If you were going to try to figure out where it fits historically between Ezra chapter 6 and Ezra chapter 7. Here's what's going on. In Ezra chapter 6, there's a major move of God, and God makes a way out of no way for really very faithful Jews to leave exile and return to Jerusalem, rebuild the temple. And in Ezra chapter 7, God moves again in a mighty way. Actually, he's moving through the whole process, and a second group of Jews are able to exit and go back to Jerusalem. And they're really up
a level or two in their faithfulness. The folk who remain who in between those two chapters is this moment that we're studying in Esther. And the folk are kind of marginalized if you're not really on fire. And so, but everybody say timing. God has a way of using time to demonstrate a supernatural move. And I think this is God's timing. For example, I said this on Thursday night. By the way, on Thursday night, I just want to give God praise. It's part of the amazing thing that's going on here. We had over 400 people to show up here on Thursday night for prayer and worship. Come on, that's God's supernatural timing. In less than 10 months, come on, I want you to get this. Say 10 months. 10 months. In less than 10 months, we went from 0 to 1,500 believers right here, a vibrant congregation. That's a supernatural move of God. I believe it. Wait a moment. Just read the news. And Republicans and Democrats are still fighting each other, about to bring Congress to a halt. Class warfare is going on, rich against the poor. Race is a major issue. And yet in this place, come on, black and white and Asian, Latino and rich and poor and Republican and Democrat, for the right to the left. Come on now. We show up every week in this building and we meet in small groups, loving one another. That's a supernatural move of God. Shout timing. This is the right time to press into God. The second thing that moved the people to faith, to fast, is what I call a shared crisis. Shared crisis. Say shared crises. And here's what I mean. Listen, there's an intersection between the community interest and the individual interest in the text of Esther. Here's how it works. Haman had decided that he was going to wipe out the Jewish community in the Persian Empire. So that's a community issue. But he was going to do it by killing every individual Jew. That's an individual issue. You see what I'm saying? There's an intersection between the interests of the community and the interests of the individual. Both of them had the same issue. They needed something done that only God could do. Right? So that's part of what drove us into this place of fasting. God has a way of getting our attention. You know, what about the building? What about the building? How are we going to do it? And we realize corporately, as we share in the mission of sharing the love of Jesus Christ, that this building thing is something that only God can do. Corporately. All right? So that's enough for us to go before the Lord and just seek his face and say, okay, God, what do we need to do? What are you trying to position? What are you trying to say to us? But at the same time, there's an intersection with your individual stuff. Watch this. I bet in every one of your lives, just like in my life, there's at least one thing that you really need to get done, and only God can do it. So now you got two reasons to press into fasting for the next 40 days. You're going to press in on behalf of NBCC, but you're going to press in because you need God. So why? That we're backed into this question. So why would I do it? Okay, three reasons. First of all, number one, I just named it. We need God to do something that only God can do. That's self-interest. Three ways in which it's self-interest. Here's the first. Some of us need clarity. And we're going to be fasting and praying that God will give us clarity. Some have been going to the hospital back and forth. The doctor can't figure out what's going on. And you're going to take this to the Lord. The Lord, over the next 40 days, you're going to give clarity. Some high schoolers in here are trying to figure out where they're going to go to college, or whether the guy or the girl who's masquerading as someone who's in love with them actually is. You know, you need clarity. And you're going to take the next 40 days to seek the Lord about that. Because God is concerned about all of our stuff. All right? For somebody else, you actually need God to do something. Break something loose in your life. I'll give you an example. At Thursday night, a woman came up to me. She said, look, when you were at Abundant Life a few years ago as a teaching pastor, She said, for years I'd had an addiction, and I could never break it. She said, I'd get as far as 18 months, and I'd slide back. She said, I walked in, and the Lord was using you to teach one day, and something happened. And I kept coming, and the Lord kept using the teaching. And so I just wanted to tell you, this is what she told me on Thursday night, about what the Lord has done. And I hope he's doing this every week with you guys, about what the Lord did with the teaching. He used your teaching, and he broke something in me that I had never been broken before. And I've been clean and sober for 3 years. And now she's being trained and equipped to become a drug counselor to help other folk with their recovery. All right? Now, that's a good news story, and here is the word for you. Some of you, I know it's true, that you are struggling with something in your life. For some of it, it's a woundedness that you've tried to get healed, and it's just not healed. You can't heal it. It's in your relationship. You can't heal it. It's in your emotional, and only God can heal it. For somebody else, it's an addiction. It's an emotion like an anger. There's something going on, and you need some help, and you've tried everything, and you can't fix it. But God says, give me a try. You stretch out over these next 40 days. I believe that God will position your heart so he can break something in your life. And then thirdly, some of us are in need of strength and discipline for what lies ahead. Strength and discipline. You see, Esther, when she says, go tell the people to pray for me, and in 3 days, I'm going to go. She already had clarity. She didn't need clarity. She already decided what she was going to do before she asked folk to fast. What she needed was 2 things. One, she needed to know that when she walked before the king, it was going to take an act of God for the king not to kill him, but to put his scepter. So that was something that only God could do. Fast for me, she says. And secondly, she needed to know that she had to, when it came time for that day, she needed strength and discipline not to back out. Because it sounded good, if I die, so I die. That sounds all right. But when it really comes down to it, all right, let me tell you the story. I was at one of our partner's house the other night, Rhonda and I, Friday night. They cooked a wonderful meal, and she shared this extraordinary story. She is a partner and a leader here at NBCC. She has MS, and she's had it for years. In the first stage of the diagnosis, she tried to keep it secret, wouldn't tell anybody. She told me the story. She said she went to work, and she's really feeling bad, and she was worried about her future because the thing was getting worse. She didn't know how long she could hide it. And so she was talking to one of her employees. She's casting vision because he was really a high-power leader in the organization. The young lady that she was talking to just started crying, just broke out crying. Shocked our partner. She was like, what's going on? Now listen to what she said. The young lady said, I'm not really spiritual. In other words, I'm not a big superstar Christian. She said, I barely go to church. I said, really? I go to Catholic church, and I don't really even do that. I just stop by every now and then, a few mornings, and I light a candle, a prayer candle. She said, I was lighting a candle this morning. I stopped by and lit a candle, and when I lit the candle, she said, an image appeared in my mind, and it was you. It was the first time this employee had ever met this big boss of hers. And she said, and then I heard a voice, and the voice said to tell you that you're going to be okay. Now, there's just layers here that I don't have time to unpack. First of all, watch it. She wasn't quoting no scriptures. She didn't pray a lot. She rarely went to church. She was a nominal Christian at the very least. Come on. And God surprised her and used her to bring an extraordinary word of comfort. He can use you. Secondly, what our partner said to me was, she needed to hear that I'm going to be okay. But the next 2 years, things got worse, went down. She became paralyzed. She couldn't get out of bed. She thought it was over. But that word that she got, you're going to be okay. She held on to it. And today, she's up and walking and cooking and talking and leading and just being a tremendous blessing because God is as good as his word. Come on now. And his word is as good as God. So some of you, you know what? After 40 days, you're going to face some pretty heavy stuff. I don't know what it is, but I'm saying to you that you need to fast during the next 40 days so that you will have the strength and the discipline not to give up when life comes unglued. And you need to be able to hear God say to you now that if you trust him, it will get bad, but you're going to be okay. So that's one of the reasons is around self-interest. That's why you ought to be pressing in. This second reason is you ought to do it because you love other folk. You ought to do it for others. There's some other people. Mordecai was saying this in verse 8. He says, look, I need you to go and plead for the king for your people. In other words, think about the kids you grew up with, Esther. They're going to be killed. Think about your good friends. They're not in the palace, but you're staying. They're going to be killed. They're going to be lost. You ought to be moved. And you can hear this in Esther when she says, I'm going to go. I'm going to go. And if I die, I die because, somebody needs me to take a risk for them. And you can hear Mordecai say, who knows that perhaps for such a time as this, you were made queen. In other words, it's providential that you have the relationships that you have. So that's why I want you to take this card here. This is why we designed this card. Look at this card on the other side. And here's the question that I need to ask you. Listen, when Esther got ready to go, she said, tell the community to fast for me. And two insights out of that. One, when we fast together, we share in each other's suffering. But two, it says fast for me meant that other folk were fasting for her. So I'll flip that and say, what we're asking you to do is just make a list of about 7 folk who God will bring to your mind. You can even write the first one right now. And who are some people that God has put it on your heart that is worth your taking a risk and fasting for? That God will move in their life. Who is it? Who is it? Is it a nephew that you know is going off the cliff? You ought to write his name here. Isn't he worth your fasting for? Is it a friend that is beloved and that is dear to you, was just diagnosed with cancer, and the doctors are not really clear about the course? Can you write her name down or his name? Isn't he or she worth fasting for? Is it a spouse that is stubborn and irresponsible and is just driving you crazy? Maybe you ought to write his or her name down. Is she or he worth fasting for? Is it a child that is just literally going in the wrong direction and you're scared to death, or a grandchild? Then are they worth fasting for right there? I got the story the other day, earlier, about 30 minutes ago. A woman came to church Thursday night. She said she had been backsliding. She hadn't been to church in a long time. She said she had been without a job. She was just so depressed. She said she came to church, and while she was here on Thursday night, she rededicated her life to Jesus. And then she said when she got home, on her voicemail was 2 messages. Both were job offers. All right? Now here's my point. All that had to be coordinated, but my point is simply this. Come on now. That when you stretch out and say, some things are worth taking a risk for, that I'm going to press into God. God says, I got you right where I need you. Now I can move in and through the lives of some of your people. And so I'm not asking you to go reach out to them for the next couple of weeks. Just put this somewhere and pray and fast. Seek God's face that he might move in their lives. And then put your own issue there. There's a sentence there that says, what are you looking for? What's that one thing you need God to do? Put that there. Now let me wrap this up by asking the question, so how do I do it? Come on, everybody say how. I'm glad you asked. Three commitments I'm going to ask you to make here. Here's the first commitment. The first commitment I want you to ask, I want you to commit to a time frame. 40 days. It starts tomorrow. Even if you don't know what you're going to do, yet I want you to decide I'm in. So I'm going to start tomorrow, and I'll go at least till Friday before Easter. That's a 40-day period. Commit to a time frame. Say, I'll commit. Secondly, I want you to commit to sacrificing something you love. You're going to give it up because it's going to open up space for you to really hunger most for God. You're going to give it up. You're going to give it up. We have a value here that says we give up things that we love for things we love more. All right. So let me give you some examples just so you can help. When am I going to fast? You don't have to fast the same thing. Esther said to Mordecai, tell them don't eat or drink for 3 days. So they were giving up food and water. So we can give up, some of you can give up food provided your health will support that, right? You may give up 1 meal a day. You may give up 2 meals a day. And for the next 40 days, you'll replace that time of eating with time reading your word, praying, and journaling, spending time with God. Or maybe you'll give up not a meal, but sweets or coffee. Pete's Coffee, Starbucks. That hurts. All right. Help me, Lord. All right. Or maybe you give up, watch this, carbohydrates. That means no bread, no rice, none of that. You're going to give that up for 40 days. Or maybe you'll give up, check this out, TV. Imagine this, 40 days without watching TV. I feel the pain in the room right now. I feel it. But look at the time and the space it opens up in your life to hang out with your kids, to do games with your folk, and to spend time reading your word and seeking God in prayer. You open up space. I need an encounter with God. Or imagine this, going 40 days without doing any social media. No Facebook, no Twitter, none of that. And replacing that time, journaling and reading through either Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. Pick one of the Gospels and just say, I'm going to read through it, and I'm going to journal what God is saying. And I'm going to spend time going through my card and praying and asking God, even if I don't think I'm a good person, I'm just going to talk to God and say, touch this person. I'm going to tell him about it. Touch this person. And just position them for your best. Or maybe I ran into a person out there, and she said, I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to fast. I said, well, what do you love? And she didn't miss a beat. She said, sleep. I said, there it is. Right, get up an extra hour earlier for the next 40 days. Come on now. And spend time with God and praying for these loved ones and yourself. Or maybe you're going to give up dating for 40 days. I know somebody said, oh no. I heard her. But just check this. Let me try to persuade you a moment. What happens if for 40 days you close the black book, you no clubbing, no calling, no chasing after anybody else because you've decided to chase after God? What about it? What about the possibilities? And then the last commitment I'm going to ask you to make is commit to a time, commit to a sacrifice, and then thirdly, commit to doing it quietly. Everybody say quietly. Don't go to work on Tuesday morning and say, oh, I had to get up an extra hour earlier. What's wrong with you? Oh, my church is fasting and I had to be a part of the fast. Oh. Don't go out to lunch with your friends and they ordering everything. And you say, oh, I wish I could order that. Well, why can't you? Well, I'm fasting for the Lord. Jesus teaches us in Matthew 5, right? He says, look, if you do that for public gain, whatever the person say, oh, that's wonderful, that's great, that's your reward. The point here is have an agenda to keep it to you. That doesn't mean if somebody asks, you can, of course, if they press you, tell them. But your agenda shouldn't be to publicize it. Because it's between you and God. Because you want God to do something in your life. You want God to do something in the lives of the folk that you are seeking his face for. It's between between you and God. But just like you are, I want you to commit. Here's the last thing. After about a few weeks, the folk that names that you've written down, we're going to encourage you to go and invite them to come to Easter. Here's why. Not because, and please don't invite them like I'm really Mr. Spiritual whoever and just come so we can fix you like I've been fixed. No. Go say, look, God is doing something special at NBCC, and we really think God's going to really do something at Easter, and I need to be there because I need to see what God's going to do with me. Won't you come along? Won't you come? And invite folk that you don't even like. Seriously. How God is stretching you. You actually don't want them to come. But God is stretching you. If He's put them on your heart, He's put them on your heart. You write it down. Why? Because as you stretch towards them, God's going to do something in you. And in your heart and in your life. Right? And don't worry about it. Listen. My wife used to play a game with our son. And she used to say to him, all the way up until his teenage years, she would say to him, I can make you laugh. And after he got older, he said, no, you can't make me laugh. And Rhonda would just get in his face, and then he'd just break out laughing. So after a while, he'd cover his face like this. And Rhonda would just wait. She'd just wait. And as soon as he cracked his just enough to see her, he broke out laughing. That's how it is with a lot of people who you're writing on this list that you're praying for. They've hid their face from God. They're afraid of God. They feel like God has let them down. They don't think they can trust God. And if they would simply say, yes, I'll go to Easter worship service, that is a step of faith. And when they take that step of faith, that's tantamount. Remember, Jesus says, behold, I stand at the door and knock. And anyone who will open, he doesn't say how much you got to open. He said, anyone who will open, I'll come in. Come on now. And so if they will say yes, all they're doing is taking a step. They're going to peek-a-boo. And if they peek-a-boo, let God take it from there.